over a oral tradition of who knows how many hundreds of years before they actually wrote it down.
Joe Rogan sat down with Rick Strassman to discuss Adam and Eve, Lilith, and good versus evil.
If you had to like look, how do you quantify it? How do you measure it? There's no denying that evil takes place. You know, like you could come up with any number of massacres throughout history, and you say that's an evil act.
There's no question.
Right.
Right.
So
Right.
evil is a thing that's real.
If
And
there's good, there's evil.
right.
Yeah.
And then there have been many things that people have done. You're like, wow, good exists in the world. There is still good. So we know both those things are real things. We just don't know what's the root of them all. And are there really angels and demons, or are those the scapegoats for this bizarre dance of good and evil that just exists in the world?
Mm-hmm.
I would 100% agree with this statement. I mean, we don't have to look very far to see that evil exists. I think we can all bring up examples of how we have personally been impacted by some sort of evil. The observation that if there is good, then there is evil, I think is partially correct. Evil doesn't exist in and of itself. Evil is a corruption of something good. A good way to think about this is rust. Rust doesn't exist by itself. It's a corruption of metal, right? I think this is an important distinction to make. Otherwise, people start thinking that there are two equal powers fighting, but in reality, there is no fighting. Good exists on a level all by itself. This view of two powers fighting, a good versus evil kind of thing, is more of the idea of the Enuma Elish, which Billy Carson likes to promote. And Billy Carson just got debunked by Christian scholar Wes Huff. I think Joe Rogan's question about the root is the way we should think about it. Ultimately, we are looking for a foundation, a standard, because without one, it's all just a matter of opinion.
That Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden because in the beginning, it was, they were living in a world of either, truth or falsehood.
You're right.
And after eating the fruit of the difference between good and evil, they became opinionated. Oh, that's good, I like it. That's bad, I don't like it. But the issue of true or false got became muddled.
Yeah.
And they no longer were fit inhabitants of the Garden of Eden, of paradise.
Yeah, so I'm looking in my Bible to see where this idea of Adam and Eve living in this world of truth and falsehood before they disobeyed. And you know what? Yeah, it's not there. What are we talking about here? In fact, the account in Genesis says the exact opposite. Verse 25, Genesis 1. And God saw that it was good. Verse 31. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. Nowhere in this account do we see this idea of truth and falsehood, at least not before Adam and Eve sin. I do like his take here about them becoming opinionated. This is a bit of an oversimplification, but essentially, they wanted to know or determine what was good and evil. They wanted, in a sense, to be their own gods. And we see how this kind of repeats itself in humanity even today.
I think it was after Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden, that they stopped having sex. So Adam, then was just sleeping, with Lilith, and they spawned innumerable demons as a result of their relationship. Yeah, and after a while, Adam and Eve, reconciled, and they got the things together again. Yeah, but Lilith, plays a role in the understanding of evil in the world, like it's the result of the spawn of Lilith.
I'm gonna be honest. I hadn't heard about Rick until this podcast, but some of the stuff he says here will kind of leave you scratching your head, right? Like, what are you saying? I mean, just based on what we heard here, it kind of comes off like Jordan Peterson has a better grasp on the biblical text than he does. The Lilith story is interesting, but honestly, I think Jordan Peterson's unpacking of the Cain story as a sort of pattern for the evil of humanity is a better fit. Now, earlier, it seems like he's saying that Lilith comes after Eve. Now, I may be wrong about this, but I've always heard it the other way around, that Eve came after Lilith because Lilith was so evil. And none of this is in the scriptures. He does mention that, so I'll give him credit for that. I do appreciate him saying that these stories about Lilith really come from the imagination, which begs the question, Why even use it as a point of reference over the biblical text?
Ancient Hebrew version of it. Like what did you get out of it? Like, what did you?
Well, most of the translations of the Hebrew Bible are quite good. Like, the King James Version, it's very accurate. Yeah, it's a bit, stilted.
Is anything missing in the translation from when you read it in ancient Hebrew, or do you think it's pretty clear?
It's fairly one-to-one correspondence between the Hebrew words and the English translation.
This is a great take. It's more or less a consensus that the Hebrew Old Testament was carefully copied. So much so that if scribes made a small mistake, they would throw the whole thing away and start over, no matter how far along they were in the manuscript. Now remember, this is all being written down by hand, right? So if you were, let's say you were three quarters of the way done and you made a mistake, nope, start over. So they were very meticulous in how they were copying these manuscripts. This claim about translations not being accurate is something you hear over and over. So hopefully, by him saying that they're more or less a one-to-one correspondence with the English translation, will kind of put this whole objection to rest. We can be confident that what we have in our Bibles has been accurately translated.
Very ancient, very influential text.
So, is it also possible that something completely different took place, but that over time and over a oral tradition of who knows how many hundreds of years before they actually wrote it down, and then writing it down, that you're getting a version of the actual event that's very different than what really took place, but you think about it like the version in the scripture. And if you think about it in the version of the scripture, are you thinking about it like as if this was an event as recorded, or are you thinking this is a representation of an archetype or some sort of moment in human history that they're trying to recollect and pass down?
Well, if
If
you
that makes any
consider,
sense.
yeah, kind of, yeah. Well, if you consider, the text to be prophetically received, prophecy is communication between the divine and man, and the text was prophetically received. In fact, Philo of Alexandria, one of Terence McKenna's heroes, used to say, the most accurate historians were the prophets. Because they heard it, directly, from the initiator of the event, the witness of the event, the one who could understand the event. And
The problem here, when people think about oral tradition, they think it was like the telephone game. And in reality, that's not at all what it was. Also, keep in mind that this is all based on having a covenant with God, and covenants were expected to have scriptures along with them. Kind of like how the other ancient Near East cultures had their treatises. In the book of Kings, it talks about how Josiah found the book of the law. So clearly, they had writings. I heard this quote recently from Plato, where he basically says that writing will make people lazy because they wouldn't bother to memorize anything.
There's multiple versions of it. First of all, the story of this, the fantastic story is told by Zecharia Sitchin. So Zecharia Sitchin, who wrote The 12th Planet, and he wrote several other books. He was a biblical scholar and a linguist, and he spent a lot of time studying the...
Hold on. Let's run that back.
He was a biblical scholar and a linguist.
You sure about that? Michael Heiser is a real scholar. You know who else is a real scholar? Wes Huff. Let's get Wes Huff on Joe Rogan.
When I started to get into Zecharia Sitchin's work, naturally, again, this is the way academics think. I wanted to establish his credentials. And to this day, I haven't been able to find, nor have other people whom I've asked to help, people who like Sitchin. I've never been able to find any actual credentials of him knowing any of the languages or being credentialed in any way in ancient Near Eastern studies. And so again, that leads me to suspect that we have an amateur here who got interested in this idea and sort of ran with it. But I have not been able to find a single credential that would qualify him to speak as a scholar in these areas, or that would help other scholars sort of look at him as someone in the guild, someone that they can sort of view as a peer. Without those credentials, they're not going to give him the time of day.
I don't know about you, but I would rather listen to a real scholar like Michael Heiser as opposed to Zecharia Sitchin, who did not have any credentials to any of the claims that he said that he knew. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you next time.